Ever since I was a kid, my dad would take me to different places in the wilderness, where we would pitch our tent, make a fire, and he would tell me stories. He taught me everything I know about survival, nature, and adventure. But he passed away 2 years ago after a long battle with cancer. It was the hardest thing I ever had to face. I felt lost and alone, without him by my side. I missed him so much. That's why I decided to take this solo trip to the mountains, do a remote spot that he had told me about once. He said it was a beautiful place, with a clear lake, a dense forest, and a stunning view of the stars at night. He also said it was very secluded, and that he had never seen anyone else there. That sounded perfect to me. I wanted to honor his memory and feel his presence again. So I packed my tent, my sleeping bag, my flashlight, put some food and water, and a few other essentials. I drove 4 hours and finally reached the dirt road that led to the campsite. It was narrow and bumpy, and I had to drive slowly and carefully. After about half an hour, I saw a sign that said campground. I turned left and parked my car in a small clearing. I got out of my car and looked around. It was late afternoon, and the sun was setting behind the mountains. The air was crisp and cool, and I could hear the sound of birds and insects. The place was indeed beautiful. I grabbed my backpack and walked towards the lake. I found a flat spot near the water's edge where I set up my tent. I then gathered some firewood, started a fire, cooked some canned beans over the flames. I need them with bread after eating my meal. I decided to go for a walk around the lake before it got dark. I put on my jacket and grabbed my flashlight. I followed a trail that circled the lake. Admiring the scenery, the water was calm and clear, reflecting the sky and the trees. The forest was thick and green, with pine needles covering the ground. The air smelled fresh and earthy. I felt peaceful and relaxed. I walked for about an hour, until I reached the opposite side of the lake from where I had started. I sat there for about 5 minutes, and then decided to turn back, as it was getting dark and cold. I turned on my flashlight and retraced my steps along the trail. As I walked, I noticed something strange. There were footprints on the ground, next to mine. They looked fresh and deep, as if someone had just walked there. I stopped and looked around. There was no one in sight. Who could have made those footprints? I felt a surge of fear and curiosity. Dumb decision, but I decided to follow the footprints. Maybe they would lead me to another campsite. I followed the footprints along the trail, shining my flashlight on them. They were consistent and regular. They did not deviate from the trail, or stop, or turn back. They just kept going. I kept following them, until I reached a point where they suddenly stopped. There was nothing there but trees and bushes. No sign of a person or anything. I looked around, confused and scared. As I was standing there, I heard a noise behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there, just darkness and silence. At this point, I was getting pretty scared, so I started to hike back. But as I was hiking, I heard heavy footsteps behind me. They sounded like boots, crunching on the pine needles. I turned around, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one there, just darkness and silence. I panicked and started running. I didn't hear footsteps chasing me or anything, but I was really scared. I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else being there when I thought I was all alone. I ran for about 10 minutes and got tired, so I slowed down a bit and walked towards my camp at a very fast pace. I reached my camp in about 20 minutes, packed up my things, ran to my car, threw my stuff on the back seat, and drove away. I still don't know who made those footprints, but sometimes I wonder, was someone stalking me that night? I wanted to go camping in the White Mountain National Forest, one of the most scenic places in the United States. I had heard stories of the rugged beauty, the clear lakes, any abundant wildlife that inhabited the area. I was looking for a way to escape the stress of my job and reconnect with nature, so I decided to take a week off and drive to New Hampshire. I arrived at the Dolly Cop Campground, a large and popular site near the base of Mount Washington. The campground had over 170 sites, some with electric hookups and some without. I chose the site that was close to the Peabody River, hoping to enjoy the sound of the water at night. The site was spacious and shaded by tall pine trees. I set up my tent, unpack my gear. I made a fire in the fire ring. I spent the first day exploring the nearby trails, admiring the views of the mountains and the forests. I saw some deer, squirrels, and birds, but nothing too exciting. I returned to my campsite in the evening, cooked some dinner on my portable stove, and relaxed by the fire. I felt a sense of peace and tranquility that I hadn't felt in a long time. The next day, I decided to hike up to Mount Washington, the highest peak in the Northeast. It was a challenging hike, but I was eager to see the sun. I packed some snacks, water and a pepper spray, and headed out early in the morning. The trail was steep and rocky, the well-marked and maintained. I passed by some other hikers on the way, exchanging greetings in small talk. I reached the summit around noon, feeling proud of my accomplishment. The view is spectacular, with clear skies and panoramic vistas of the surrounding mountains and valleys. I took some pictures, ate some lunch, and visited the weather observatory that was located on top of the peak. I learned that Mount Washington was known for its extreme weather conditions, with record winds, snow, and cold temperatures. I was glad that I had picked a good day to hike. I decided to head back down around 1 p.m., knowing that it would take me several hours to reach my campsite. I followed the same trail that I had taken up, enjoying the scenery and the fresh air. As I descended, I noticed that the sky was getting darker and cloudier. I hoped that it wouldn't rain or storm before I got back. About halfway down, I heard a loud roar from behind me. It was deep in gutter, and it made my blood run cold. I turned around and saw a large bear running towards me. I froze in fear, not knowing what to do. But then I remembered that I had brought a can of pepper spray with me for emergencies. I quickly grabbed it, hoping that it would work against this beast. I pulled out the can and sprayed it at its face as it lunged at me. The spray hit its eyes and nose, causing it to yelp in pain and confusion. It stopped in its tracks and shook his head violently, trying to get rid of the burning sensation. It backed away from me, growling and snarling. I seized this opportunity and ran as fast as I could down the trail, not looking back. I didn't care about anything else but getting away from that thing. I ran until I reached my car at the parking lot near the campground entrance. I quickly got inside, unlocked the doors. I was waiting for the bear to come here at any moment. I sat in my car for about 10 minutes and then got out. I didn't run away or anything, I kept camping. But this was definitely the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I later learned that what I had encountered was not a normal bear, but a rare hybrid of a black bear and a grizzly bear. These hybrids were known to be more aggressive and unpredictable than either parent species. They were also larger and stronger than black bears. They were very rare in New Hampshire, but not unheard. I was lucky to have survived that encounter. It was one of the scariest experiences of my life. It also taught me a valuable lesson. Never go camping without pepper spray. It was supposed to be a fun trip with my friend, but it wasn't that fun for me. We arrived at the campsite on Friday evening and set up our tents near a small lake. The weather was perfect, and we had a great time roasting marshmallows and telling stories around the fire. We went to bed around midnight, feeling happy and relaxed. But at some point in the night, I woke up to a strange noise outside my tent. It sounded like someone was walking around dragging something heavy. I thought it was my friend, maybe going to the bathroom or getting some water. I decided to ignore it and go back to sleep. But then I heard a scream, a loud, piercing scream that made me jump out of my sleeping bag. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent and looked outside. But as soon as I looked outside, the scream stopped, and I saw nothing. There was nothing. I quickly ran towards my friend's tent, opened it. He was sleeping, so I quickly woke him up. And, "Did you hear that scream?" He said no. I told him about what I heard. He said, "You must have imagined it." He told me to calm down and just sleep. He said even if it wasn't your imagination, it was probably some animal, so I went back to my tent, feeling uneasy and scared. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I kept thinking about the scream and what could have caused it. The next day, I told my friend that we should leave. He said it must have been an animal or something you're getting scared for no reason. But finally, after a few minutes of back and forth, I convinced him to leave, and we packed up and left. I arrived at the campsite on Friday evening and set up my tent near a small. The weather was nice, and I was eating my meal. I was enjoying the solitude, listening to the sounds of nature, until I heard a loud splash from the lake. I looked over and saw something big and dark moving in the water. It looked like a huge fish, or maybe a crocodile. I couldn't tell for sure, but it was definitely not normal. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to get a better look, but the thing disappeared under the surface. I was freaked out, but I tried to calm myself down. I decided to stay away from the lake and go back to my tent. I hoped that whatever it was, it would leave me alone. That night, I woke up to a strange noise outside my tent. It sounded like something heavy dragging on the ground. I thought it might be a wild animal looking for food, so I grabbed my flashlight and opened the zipper and peeked outside. I wish I hadn't. There in front of me, about 20 feet away, was the most horrifying creature I had ever seen. It was pale, with a skinny and hairless body. It had long arms and legs, and it was standing on its hind legs like a human. It was staring right at me with its halo eyes. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to scream or move, and had started to shake with fear. It stared at me for about 20 seconds, then turned around, got on its all fours, and ran away into the woods. I heard it crashing through the trees until it was gone. When it was gone, I packed up my things as fast as I could and got in my car. I drove away from that place as fast as possible, never looking back. I don't think I will ever go camping again. We had set up our tents in the woods. Mirror. The place was beautiful and peaceful, and we had a great time on the first day. We went fishing, swimming, hiking, and roasted marshmallows by the fire. We laughed and joked and told stories until late at night. The next day, we decided to explore the area a bit more. We found a trail that led deeper into the forest, and we followed it, curious to see what was there. The trail was narrow and winding, and the trees were thick and dark. We felt like we were in a different world. We walked for about an hour when we came across a clearing. In the middle of it, there was a small wooden shack. It looked old and abandoned, and it had a sign that said "Keep Out." We were intrigued by it. I decided to check it out. We approached the shack cautiously. The door was unlocked, and we opened it slowly. Inside, we saw a scene that made our blood run cold. There were animal carcasses hanging from the ceiling, some of them skinned and gutted. There were bones and skulls piled up in the corners and blood stains on the floor and walls. There were also tools and weapons scattered around, like knives, axes, and saw. We were horrified by what we saw and quickly ran out of there. We ran for about 5 minutes, then slowed down and hiked back to our campsite and acted normal, as if nothing had happened. I enjoyed the rest of our camping trip, but I couldn't get the image of that shack out of my mind. It was as if it was burned into my mind. I always loved camping, especially in the summer when the weather was nice and the nights were clear. I decided to go on a solo trip to one of the best places to camp in the US, Sierra Vista in New Mexico. It was a beautiful campground, surrounded by mountains and forests, with a lake nearby and plenty of trails to explore. The campsite was spacious and well-maintained, with fire pit, picnic tables, and restrooms. I set up my tent near the edge of the woods, where I could enjoy the view and the privacy. The first day was great. I hiked around the lake, saw some wildlife, and cooked some hot dogs over the fire. I felt relaxed and happy, away from the stress and noise of the city. I went to bed early, looking forward to another day of adventure. The second day was when things started to go wrong. I woke up to a loud noise outside my tent. At around 3 a.m., it sounded like something heavy was dragging on the ground. I grabbed my flashlight and peeked outside, but I saw nothing. The noise stopped as soon as I turned on the light. I thought it might have been a deer or a bear, so I decided to stay inside until dawn. In the morning, I checked around my tent and found some strange marks on the dirt. They looked like claw marks, but they were too big and deep for any animal I knew. They led from the woods to my tent and back again. I felt a chill run down my spine. What was out there? I decided to pack up and leave as soon as possible. I didn't want to spend another night in that place. I threw everything into my car and drove away, hoping to never come back. But as I was driving, I noticed something odd in my rearview mirror. There was a dark shape following me on the road. It was too far to see clearly, but it looked larger than bears. I panicked and stepped on the gas pedal and sped away as fast as possible. I still don't know what that thing was. I wanted to go camping in Colorado, one of the best states for camping in the US. I had heard so much about the stunning scenery, the fresh air, and the wildlife. So when I found a cheap deal online for a campsite near Rocky Mountain National Park, I didn't hesitate to book it. The campsite looked amazing on the website. It was located on a hill overlooking a lake, surrounded by pine trees and wildflowers. It had a swimming pool, playground, and a convenience store. Seemed like the perfect place to relax and enjoy nature. Packed my tent, sleeping bag, flashlight, and some food and drove to the campsite. It was a long drive, but I was excited to see the mountains I arrived in the afternoon and checked in at the office. The staff was friendly and gave me a map of the campsite. They told me I could choose any spot as long as it was not reserved. I drove around the campsite, looking for a good spot. The place was huge, with hundreds of tents and RVs scattered around. There were families, couples, and groups of friends having fun. Some were swimming in the pool, some were playing games, and some were cooking on grills. It looked like a lively and welcoming community. I decided to pitch my tent near the lake, away from the crowd. I wanted some peace and quiet, and I also wanted to enjoy the view of the water. I found a nice spot under a pine tree with enough space for my tent in my car. I set up my tent and unpacked my stuff. Then I decided to take a walk around the lake. The lake was beautiful, with clear blue water reflecting the sky. There were ducks and geese swimming on the surface and fish jumping out of the water. The show was rocky and sand, with patches of grass and flowers. There was some benches and picnic tables along the way, what people were sitting and chatting. I walked around the lake for about an hour, enjoying the scenery and the fresh air. I saw some squirrels, rabbits, and birds along the way. I also saw some signs warning about bears and mountain lions in the area. They said to keep food in bear-proof containers to make noise when hiking, and to avoid contact with wild animals. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured that as long as I followed the rules, I would be safe. Besides, there were so many people around that I doubted any predators would come near. I felt relaxed and happy as I walked back to my tent. I got back to my tent just before sunset. I decided to make some dinner on my portable stove. I had brought some canned soup, bread, cheese, and fruit. It was not gourmet food, but it was enough to fill me up. I ate my dinner while watching the sun go down over the lake. It was a beautiful sight. After dinner, I cleaned up my dishes and put them in my car. Then I got into my sleeping bag and turned off my flashlight. I was too tired to read or do anything else. I just wanted to sleep. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. Something has startled me awake. It was a loud noise outside my tent. It sounded like something heavy hitting metal. It sounded like a bear attacking my car. I sat up in my sleeping bag and grabbed my flashlight. My heart was pounding in my chest. My mind was racing with fear. I heard another loud bang and then a growl. It was definitely a bear. I didn't know what to do. The noises continued for what seemed like an eternity. Then everything fell silent. I guess the bear was gone. But I didn't dare to look outside or make any sound. I stayed in my tent until dawn. When the sun rose over the lake, I finally gathered enough courage to peek outside. I looked at my car and saw that there were a few dents on the door. I got out of my tent and saw paw prints all around my car. Damage wasn't too bad on my car and could easily be fixed. But I didn't want to encounter that bear again. So I packed up, grabbed my stuff, threw it inside my car, and drove away. I decided to go camping in Loch Katrine Eco Camping. It was located on the shore of a stunning lake in the Loch Lomond and the Traffics National Park. The campsite offered glamping pods and motorhome pitches, as well as access to a cafe, a shop. Find a boat cruise. It sounded like the perfect place to relax and enjoy nature. I arrived at the campsite on a sunny afternoon in October. I checked in at the reception and was given a map of the site. I drove my motorhome to the pitch I had reserved, which was near the edge of the lake. The view is breathtaking. I could see the blue water sparkling in the sun, surrounded by green hills and forests. I set up my motorhome and decided to take a walk around the campsite. The campsite was quite large. What, about 22 units spread out over an acre of land? There were some families with children, some couples, and some solo travelers like me. Everyone seemed friendly and happy. I smiled and waved at some of them as I passed by. I also noticed that there was some signs warning about wildlife in the area, such as foxes and badgers. I thought it would be cool to see some of them. I walked along the lakeshore, enjoying the fresh air and the peaceful atmosphere. I saw some ducks swimming in the water, some birds singing in the trees, and some flowers blooming on the ground. It was like a scene from a fairy tale. I felt so lucky to be there. I decided to explore a bit further and follow the trail that led into the woods. The trail was marked with yellow arrows, so I assumed it was safe and easy to follow. I was curious to see what else the campsite had to offer. I walked for about 15 minutes, admiring the beauty of nature. The trail was winding and hilly, but not too steep or rough. I felt a sense of adventure and excitement as I ventured deeper into the forest. Then something strange happened. I heard a loud noise behind me, like a branch snapping. I turned around and saw nothing but trees and shadows. I thought it might have been a small animal, but I didn't see any signs of movement. More life. I shrugged it off and continued walking. A few minutes later, I heard another noise, this time louder. It sounded like a loud thud. I turned around and saw a dark figure running towards me. It was too far away to make out any details, but it looked human-like and large. I felt a surge of fear and panic. I didn't have time to think or question. I only had one instinct: next, run. I turned around and ran as fast as I could along the trail, hoping to find my way back to the campsite or to encounter someone who could help me. I ran for my life, ignoring the pain in my legs and lungs. As I was running, I took one quick glance back, but saw nothing. There was nothing chasing me or anything. When I saw that whatever was chasing me had stopped, I quickly turned around and ran back towards my campsite. When I got to the campsite, I got inside my motorhome and drove away. I still don't know what was chasing me. More Wyatt. I had gone camping many times before, but this was the first time I decided to go solo. I wanted to challenge myself to prove that I could survive on my own in the wilderness. Packed my tent, put sleeping bag, flashlight, knife, matches, food, water, and a map of the area. I chose the remote spot in the mountains, where I had heard there was a beautiful lake and a waterfall. I drove 4 hours until I reached the trailhead, then parked my car and started hiking. The scenery was breathtaking, and I felt a surge of excitement as I walked deeper into the forest. I reached the lake around noon and set up my tent near the shore. The water was clear and calm, reflecting the blue sky and the green trees. I could hear the sound of the waterfall in the distance. I decided to explore the area a bit and follow the path that led to the waterfall. It was a stunning sight, a cascade of white water falling from a high cliff into a pool below. I took some pictures with my phone, then sat on a rock and ate my lunch. I felt a sudden chill in the air and looked at the sky. It was getting cloudy, and the wind was picking up. I realized that I had not checked the weather forecast before leaving. I hoped it would not rain or worse storm. I decided to head back to my tent and get ready for the night. I reached my tent just as it started to drizzle. I quickly got inside, zipped it up, changed into dry clothes, and wrapped myself in my sleeping bag. I turned on my flashlight and read a book for a while, trying to ignore the sound of rain hitting the tent. It was getting dark outside and I felt sleepy. I put away my book, turned off my flashlight, closed my eyes, and tried to fall asleep. That's when I heard it. A loud scream. It sounded like a woman in pain. Came from somewhere near the waterfall and made me jump out of my sleeping bag. Who was that? Was someone hurt? I felt torn between curiosity and fear. Part of me wanted to go check it out to see if there was someone in trouble. But another part of me wanted to stay in my tent, to hide from whatever was out there. I decided to play it safe and stay inside the tent. I had heard that mountain lions can scream like humans, and I did not want to risk encountering one in the dark. I waited for morning listening to the rain. It was the longest night of my life. When the sun finally rose, I got out of my tent and packed everything. I did not bother to check the waterfall. I hiked back to my car. When I reached my car, I got in and drove away. I decided to never go camping solo again. It was too dangerous. I learned my lesson the hard way. I always loved camping, but I never went alone before. I thought it would be a good way to relax and enjoy nature, away from the noise and stress of the city. I packed my tent sleeping bag, phone, food, water, and some books. I drove to a remote spot in the woods, where I had heard there was a nice lake and a hiking trail. I parked my car and set up my tent near the lake. It was a beautiful day, and I felt happy and peaceful. I decided to explore the trail and see if I could find a good spot to watch the sunset. I grabbed my backpack and my phone and followed the trail into the woods, admiring the trees and the birds. The trail was well and easy to follow. I walked for about an hour until I reached the clearing with a stunning view of the mountains. I sat down on a rock and took out my water bottle. I drank some water and looked at the sky. It was getting late, and the sun was starting to set. The colors were amazing, and I felt a surge of awe and gratitude. I decided to head back to my campsite before it got too dark. I packed my backpack and turned on my phone's flashlight. I followed the trail back the way I came, feeling confident and calm. The woods were quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves or chirp of crickets. I enjoyed the solitude and the silence, but then something changed. I noticed that the trail was not as clear as before. There were branches and rocks on the path, as if someone or something had moved them. I thought maybe it was an animal, or maybe I had taken a wrong turn somewhere. I checked my phone and saw that the battery was low. I started to feel nervous and anxious, quickened my pace, hoping to find my way back soon. But the more I walked, the more confused I got. The trails seemed to disappear and reappear at random places, leaving me deeper into the woods. I tried to remember landmarks or signs that I had seen before, but nothing looked familiar. It was getting darker and darker, and my battery was getting low. I started to panic. I shouted for help, hoping that someone would hear me, but there was no answer, only echoes. I felt like I was trapped in the nightmare, with no way out. I wondered if I would ever see my car or my tent again. Then I heard something. It was a low growl coming from behind me. I turned around and saw wolves standing there. It was staring right at me. I have no time to think. I dropped my backpack and ran towards the nearest tree. I climbed up as fast as I could and reached the branch that seemed sturdy enough to hold me. I looked down and saw the wolf circling around the tree. It was snarling and growling, trying to scare me. Tried to climb up the tree, but it couldn't. I hugged the branch and prayed that it would go away, but it did not. It stayed there for what seemed like an eternity, waiting for me to come down. I do not know what to do. I checked my phone again, hoping that it had some signal or battery, but it was dead. I felt hopeless. Then something changed again. The wolf stopped growling. It ran into the bushes and disappeared from sight. I saw this as my chance to escape. I climbed down from the tree as quickly as possible, grabbed my backpack and ran towards where I thought the trail was. I did not look back. I just ran for my life. Somehow, by a miracle, I found my way back to the trail. It was still dark, but I could see because of the moonlight. I followed the trail back to my campsite, hoping that nothing else would happen along the way. After what felt like an hour of hiking, I finally saw the lake in front of me, and then I saw my tent in my car nearby. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I ran towards my tent and got inside. The rest of my camping trip went perfectly. I love camping, especially when I was alone. There was something peaceful and relaxing about being in nature, away from the noise and stress of the city. I had a small tent, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, and some food and water. That was all I needed for a weekend of adventure. I decided to go to a remote forest area that I had heard about from a friend. He said it was beautiful and quiet, and that there was some trails that led to a lake and a waterfall. He also told me that it was not a popular spot, and I might not see anyone else there. That sounded perfect to me. I drove 4 hours until I reached the entrance of the forest. There was a sign that said, "No camping beyond this point." I ignored it and drove. I wanted to be as far away from civilization as possible. I found a clearing near a stream and parked my car. I got out and set up my tent. It was getting dark, so I lit a fire and cooked some food. After eating, I crawled into my tent and got inside my sleeping bag. I listened to the sounds of the night, cricket, owls, frogs, and the occasional rustle of leaves. I fell asleep almost instantly, but I woke up in the middle of the night to footsteps. They sounded quiet and not so heavy. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap. I shone the light around. Maybe it was just an animal. Is it the flat back up and tried to go back to sleep? A few minutes later, I heard footsteps again. I felt a surge of fear in my chest. Who or what could it be? I reached for my flashlight again, but before I could turn it on, I heard a voice. "Hello," it said in a low and raspy tone. I froze. It was definitely a human voice, and it sounded male. I didn't say anything. I just stayed there, quiet, not making a single noise. Then I heard footsteps. They sounded quiet, like he was trying to be as stealthy as possible while walking. I held my breath and hoped he would go away. The footsteps circled around my tent, then stopped. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. Was he going to attack me? What did you want? Then, to my relief, I heard the footsteps slowly going away into the woods. I let out a sigh and tried to calm down. I was pretty scared at this point and couldn't sleep the whole night. When morning came, I quickly packed up my things, got in my car, and drove away. I never found out who he was or what he wanted. I always loved camping, especially when I was alone. There was something peaceful and relaxing about being in nature, all alone by yourself. I had a small tent, a sleeping bag, make a flashlight, and some food and water. That was all I needed for a weekend getaway. I decided to go to a remote spot in the woods near A. I had heard that the scenery was beautiful and the wildlife was abundant. I drove my car as far as I could, then parked it and hid for an hour until I reached the lake. It was late afternoon, and the sun was setting behind the trees. The water was calm and clear, reflecting the sky. I found a flat spot near the shore and set up my tent. I made a small fire, cooked some canned beans. I kneaded them with bread and cheese. After eating my meal, I decided to go for a walk around the lake before it got dark. I grabbed my flashlight, put it in my pocket, and left my tent, thinking that no one would bother it. I walked along the shore, enjoying the fresh air and the sound of the water. The lake was surrounded by tall pine trees, creating a sense of isolation and tranquility. I felt like I was the only person in the world. I walked for about half an hour, then decided to turn back. It was getting dark, and I wanted to get back to my tent before it was too dark to see. I retraced my steps, following the shore. As I walked, I noticed something strange. There were poppins on the ground, next to mine. They looked fresh, and they looked like bare paw prints. I felt a chill run down my spine, so I quickened my pace, hoping to get back to my tent soon. I scanned the woods with my flashlight, looking for any signs of movement or danger. I saw nothing but shadows and trees. I reached my tent and breathed a sigh of relief. It was still there, untouched by anyone or anything. I ran to my tent and zipped it up behind me. I felt safer inside, but not much. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that it was just a bear, not that dangerous, right? I lay down in my sleeping bag, hoping to get some sleep, I turned off my flashlight and closed my eyes. The night was quiet, except for the occasional sound of crickets or owls or frogs. I tried to ignore them and focus on my breathing. I don't know how long but it wasn't enough. I woke up suddenly, feeling a cold sweat on my forehead. As I was laying there, I heard it. A low growl coming from outside my tent. Right then I realized it was a bear, and it was very close by me. I froze in fear, not knowing what to do. Should I stay in my tent and hope that it would go away? Should I try to run to my car and escape? I decided to stay in my tent and wait for it to go away. I tried to be as quiet as possible, hoping that the bear would not notice me. I heard it come near my tent, sniffing and grunting. I felt its breath on the fabric. I prayed that it would not rip through the tent and attack me. I was terrified, but I did not move or make a sound. Then, out of nowhere, it walked away from my tent back into the woods. I heard its footsteps fade away, until there was silence again. I was relieved, but still scared. I did not dare to get out of my tent. I stayed in my sleeping bag, shivering and sweating. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I waited for the sun to rise, and then I packed up my things and hiked to my car. When I reached my car, I quickly got in and drove away as fast as I could, never looking back. This was the scariest experience of my life. I thought camping would be a good way to relax and enjoy nature, so I packed my tent,
sleeping bag, flashlights,
food, water, and some books. I drove to a remote spot in the woods, where I had heard there was a beautiful lake and a hiking trail. I set up my tent near the lake. I decided to go for a walk before it got dark. The trail was well marked and easy to follow. I saw some birds, squirrels, and deer along the way. I felt peaceful and happy. I decided to turn back after half an hour, so I can make a fire and cook some dinner. As I was walking back, I noticed something strange. There was a pile of rocks on the side of the trail with a stick sticking out of it. It looked like someone had made a marker or a sign. I wondered who else was camping here, and why they had left this. I felt curious, so I decided to check it out. I walked over to the pile of rocks and saw the stick. It looked like a normal wooden stick. Nothing special. I was about to turn back, thinking it was a waste of time, when I accidentally looked at the ground near the rocks. There was something that made me freeze in horror. It was a human finger with a ring on it. It was bloody and rotten. I felt sick and terrified. I ran back to my tent as fast as I could. When I reached my tent, I quickly packed up my stuff, threw it in my car, and drove away. I could physically feel myself shaking while I was driving away. I still wonder, was that the doing of some cult? I love camping, especially in the summer when the weather was warm and the nights were clear. I decided to go on a solo trip to one of the best campsites in Canada, Lake of the Woods Campground in Cathedral Provincial Park, BC. It was a beautiful place, surrounded by mountains and forests, with a crystal clear lake that reflected the sky. The campground had 32 sites, each with a fire pit and a picnic table. I chose the site near the lake where I could enjoy the view and the sound of the water. I set up my tent, unpacked my gear, and made a fire. I cooked some hot dogs and marshmallows, and then relaxed by the fire reading a book. I felt peaceful and happy, away from the stress and noise of the city. I decided to go to bed early, so I could wake up early and explore the park. I put out the fire, got inside my tent, zipped it up, crawled into my sleeping bag, closed my eyes, and drifted off to sleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark outside. I heard a noise that made me sit up, an alarm. It sounded like footsteps, heavy footsteps, right outside my tent. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it at the source of the noise. I saw a dark shape moving outside my tent, blocking the light. It looked like a bear. I quickly turned off the flashlight and laid there, holding my breath. I could hear the bear sniffing around my tent, grunting and growling. I felt a surge of fear and prayed that it would leave me alone. I wish I had brought a bear spray or a whistle, but I had not expected to encounter a bear in this campground. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard the bear moving away into the woods. I let out a sigh of relief and thanked God for sparing me. It was definitely a terrifying experience, but I decided not to let it ruin my trip. I love camping too much to give it up because of one incident. I enjoyed the rest of my stay there. I had always wanted to go camping in the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire. It was one of the most scenic places in the country, with lush forests, clear lake, and majestic mountains. I had heard that the fall was the best time to visit, when the leaves turned into vibrant colors and the air was crisp and cool. I decided to take a solo trip and booked a campsite at the Dolly Cop Campground, which was located near the base of Mount Washington, the highest peak in the Northeast. The campground had over 100 sites, some with electric hookups and some without. I chose the primitive site since I wanted to experience nature as much as possible. I packed my tent, sleeping bags, food, water, flashlight, and other essentials in my backpack and drove to the campground. I arrived in the afternoon and checked in at the ranger station. The ranger gave me a map of the campground and told me where my site was. He also wanted me to be careful of bears and other wildlife, and to store my food in the bear-proof container or hang it from a tree. He said that there had been some reports of strange noises and sightings in the woods recently, but he didn't know what they were. He said it was probably just some pranksters or animals, but he advised me to stay on the trails and not wander off too far. I thanked him and drove to my site. It was a nice spot, surrounded by trees and with a fire ring and a picnic table. I set up my tent and packed my gear. After setting up my tent, I decided to go for a hike before it got dark. So I grabbed my map and headed to the nearest trailhead. The trail was well marked and easy to follow. It led me through the forest, past streams and waterfalls, add up to a lookout point where I could see the whole valley below. It was breathtaking. After taking some pictures and enjoying the view for a while, I checked my watch and realized that it was getting late, so I decided to head back to my campsite before it got too dark. I retraced my steps and followed the trail back down. As I walked, I noticed that the forest was getting quieter. The birds have stopped singing and the wind had died down. I quickened my pace and tried to ignore the feeling. I told myself that there was nothing wrong. I was almost back to the campground when I heard a loud snap behind me. I turned around and saw a large branch falling from a tree. It landed on the ground with a thud. I jumped and looked up at the tree. There was nothing there. No animal, no person. No sign of what had caused the branch to break. I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned back around and ran to my campsite. When I reached my site and breathed a sigh of relief, I saw my tent, my car, my fire ring. Everything as I had left it. I felt safe again. I decided to start a fire and cook some dinner. I gathered someone from around my site and lit it with a match. The fire crackled and warmed me up. I opened my backpack and took out my hot water and food. I was gonna make some instant noodles. Nothing fancy, but feeling enough. I set up my stove on the picnic table and boiled some water. As I waited for the water to boil, I heard a loud snap behind me. I turned around and saw a branch falling from a tree. It landed on the ground with a thud. I felt a surge of fear. What was going on? I grabbed my flashlight and shone it at the tree. There was something there. It looked like a human, but not quite. It was pale and creepy and with long limbs. It had no hair or clothes, and it was staring at me with its black hollow eyes. As soon as I saw it, I went into a frenzy. I dropped everything and ran towards my car. I didn't care about my tent or my gear or anything else. I just wanted to get away from that thing. I reached my car, opened the door and got in. Slammed the door shut and locked it. Started the engine, stepped on the gas pedal, drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station. I never went camping alone again, but I still wonder, what was that thing? I wanted to go camping alone in the woods, to experience the thrill of being in nature by myself. I had done some research and found a secluded spot near a lake, where I could pitch my tent and enjoy the peace and quiet. I packed my backpack with the essentials: a sleeping bag, a flashlight, some food and water, a knife, and a can of bear spray. I also brought my camera, hoping to capture some beautiful scenery and wildlife. I arrived at the campsite in the afternoon and set up my tent near the edge of the lake. The view was breathtaking, with the sun reflecting on the water and the trees swinging in the breeze. I decided to explore the area a bit and walked along the shore, snapping some photos of the birds and flowers. I didn't see any signs of other people or animals, which made me feel both excited and nervous. I returned to my tent as the sun was setting and cooked some instant noodles. I ate them quickly, feeling hungry after the long hike. I cleaned up my mess and stored my food and trash in a metal container that I hung from a tree branch, away from my tent. I had read that this was the best way to avoid attracting bears or other critters. I crawled into my sleeping bag, feeling tired but happy. I turned off my flashlight and listened to the sounds of the night. I heard crickets chirping, Alice hooting, and frogs croaking. It was soothing and relaxing, and I soon drifted off to sleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark outside. I felt a sudden jolt of fear as I realized what had woken me up. A loud snuffling noise right outside my tent. It sounded like a large animal was sniffing around, looking for something. I held my breath, hoping it would go away, softly, and soon realized it was a bear. Panicked and reached for my kind of bear spray. I grabbed it just in time as the bear tore through the tent walls at me. I sprayed it directly in its eyes and nose, hoping to blind and stand. It worked. The bear yelped in pain and backed away from me. It shook its head violently, trying to get rid of the burning sensation. It looked at me with rage in its eyes. I didn't waste any time. I got out of my sleeping bag and ran towards I knew that bears were not good swimmers, and that water would slow them down. I hoped that the bear would not follow me, but it did. Chased me across the campsite, ignoring its own discomfort. It was faster than me on land, and was gaining on me. When I reached the shore of the lake, I dove into the water. The water was cold and dark, but I didn't care. I swam as fast as I could, hoping to reach the other side. The bear followed me into the water, but not for long. Soon realized that it was out of its element. Annette's swimming was not its forte. It struggled to keep up with me, but soon fell behind. I looked back at it and saw that it had given up. It had turned around and was heading back to the shore. I felt a surge of relief and kept swimming until I reached the other side of the lake. I stood there for about 10 minutes, catching my breath and calming my nerves. But I needed to get my stuff back. I decided to go back to my campsite and pack up what was left of my belongings. I didn't want to leave anything behind, so I went around the lake and reached my campsite in a few minutes. It was a mess. The tent was shredded, and my belongings were scattered everywhere. I looked for anything that was salvageable, packed it in my backpack, and left. I decided to spend a weekend at Heather Hills State Park in Montauk, New York. What are the best camping places in the USA? It was a scenic camping area with 2 miles of sandy beach, our freshwater lake sand dunes, and oceanfront sunrises. I booked a campsite online and packed my tent, sleeping bag, flashlight, and some food and water. I was looking forward to a relaxing and peaceful getaway. I arrived at the park on Friday afternoon and checked in at the ranger station. The ranger gave me a map of the park and told me where my campsite was. He also wanted me to be careful of the wildlife, especially the coyotes that sometimes roamed around at night. He said they were usually harmless, but they could be attracted by food or garbage left out in the open. He advised me to keep my food in a sealed container and dispose of my trash properly. I thanked him for the tips and drove to my campsite. My campsite was near the lake, surrounded by trees and bushes. It was spacious and secluded, with a fire pit and a picnic table. I set up my tent and unpacked my stuff. Then I decided to take a walk around the lake and enjoy the scenery. The lake was calm and clear, reflecting the blue sky and the colorful foliage. I saw some ducks swimming on the water and some squirrels running on the ground. I felt a sense of tranquility and happiness. I returned to my campsite as the sun was setting, made a fire and cooked some hot dogs and marshmallows. I ate my dinner and watched the stars come out. It was a beautiful night, quiet and serene. I heard some crickets chirping. I crawled inside my tent, feeling cozy and warm in my sleeping bag, and fell asleep easily. But I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night because I heard a noise outside my tent. It sounded like footsteps. Right away, I realized it was a coyote. It circled my tent a few times, and then all of a sudden it tore through my tent and bit my arm. I quickly grabbed my knife that I had kept under my pillow for safety. I stabbed the coyote in the chest and pushed it off me. I ran towards my truck, hoping to escape. The coyote howled in pain and anger, but it did not follow me. I got inside my truck, turned on the engine and drove away, leaving my stuff behind. I did not care about them anymore. All I wanted was to get away from that beast. I looked at my arm and saw blood dripping from the wound. It hurt like hell, but it was not deep enough to be fatal. I went to the nearest hospital and got some medicine and stuff. The doctor told me that I was lucky to survive such an attack. He also said that I should get a rabies shot just in case. I wanted to go camping in California, the state with some of the most diverse and beautiful landscapes in the US. I had heard so much about the stunning scenery, the diverse wildlife, and the adventurous activities. So when I found a cheap deal for a campsite at Kirk Creek Campground, I didn't hesitate to book it. Kirk Creek Campground is located on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean in the Los Padres National Forest. It has 34 sites, each with a picnic table, fire ring, and access to vault toilets and drinking water. The campground is surrounded by pine trees and wildflowers, and offers spectacular views of the ocean and the mountains. It also has a trail that leads to a secluded beach, where you can swim. More fish. I arrived at the campground on a sunny afternoon and set up my tent at site number 12, which had a clear view of the ocean. I was alone, as I wanted to enjoy some peace and quiet away from the city. I didn't see any other campers around, which was fine by me. I decided to explore the area a bit and follow the trail to the beach. It was a short walk, but steep and rocky. The beach was beautiful, with golden sand and turquoise water. I dipped my toes in the water, but it was too cold for me. After a while, I decided to go back to my campsite and make some dinner. When I got back to my campsite, I cooked some hot dogs over the fire. I ate them with some chips and soda. I watched the sunset over the ocean and felt a sense of calm and happiness. I decided to go to bed early, as I planned to hike in the morning. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped up my tent, and fell asleep quickly. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to a loud noise outside my tent, like something heavy being dragged across the ground. I sat up in my sleeping bag and grabbed my flashlight, turned it on, and pointed it at the tent flap. I saw a dark shadow moving outside. It looked like a large animal, maybe a mountain lion. I felt a surge of fear and wondered what to do. I wasn't sure if it knew I was in the tent, so I decided to stay silent and hope that it would go away. I turned off my flashlight. I laid down in my sleeping bag, held my breath, and just listened. The noise continued for a few minutes, then stopped for a few minutes. After 1 to 2 minutes of silence, I heard footsteps around my tent, then silence again. I waited for what seemed like an eternity, but nothing happened. I wondered if it was safe to look outside, or if I should wait until morning. I decided to take a peek, just to make sure. I slowly unzipped my tent flap and stuck my head out. It was pretty dark, but I could see because of the moonlight. My campsite was trashed. My cooler was overturned and my food was scattered everywhere. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that there were blood stains on the ground, leading to the edge of the bluff. I felt a chill run down my spine as I followed the trail of blood with my eyes. What had happened here? I quickly packed up my things and threw them into my car. I didn't care about cleaning up after myself. I just wanted to get out of there. I drove away from the campground without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station in town. I gathered myself together at the gas station and then drove back home. I guess camping in California wasn't such a good idea after all. Maybe next time I'll try something less adventurous, like staying at a cabin. I had always loved camping, but after that night, I swear to never go alone again. It was a cold and dark night, and I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees and mountains. I had set up my 10-year small stream, hoping to catch some fish in the morning. I had a fire going, but it was dying out, and I didn't have much wood left, so I decided to call it a night and get some sleep. I crawled into my tent and zipped it up. I had a sleeping bag and a flashlight, but no other comfort. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up with a sudden urge to pee. I groaned and checked my watch. It was around 2:30 a.m. I really didn't want to get out of my tent, but I knew I couldn't hold it in much longer. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent. I stepped out and looked around. It was pitch black, except for the faint glow of the moon. The fire was completely out, and the forest was completely quiet, except for the sound of the stream nearby. I walked a few meters away from my tent, looking for a spot to relieve myself. I found a bush and crouched behind it. As I was doing my business, I heard a twig snap in front of me. I froze and turned on my flashlight. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a mountain lion about 15 to 20 m away from me, staring right at me. It was huge with yellow eyes and sharp teeth. I felt a surge of fear and panic. I didn't know what to do, so I decided to stay still and hope that it would lose interest and leave me alone. The mountain lion stared at me for what seemed like an eternity. It was probably only a few seconds, tilted its head slightly, as if curious about me. Then it turned around and walked away. I quickly finished peeing and ran back to my tent, set it up and curled up in my sleeping bag. I turned off my flashlight and tried to calm down. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every sound made me jump. As soon as the sun came up, I packed up my stuff and hiked back to my car. I didn't bother with fishing or sightseeing or anything else. I just wanted to get out of there, because I was afraid I might encounter the mountain lion again. I loved camping since I was a kid, but after what happened that night, I don't think I'll ever go again. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend in the woods. Away from the stress and noise of the city, I had packed my tent, sleeping bag, flashlight, flight, and some food and water. I drove to a secluded spot near a lake, where I set up my camp. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm, with a gentle breeze. I spent the day hiking, fishing, and enjoying nature. As the sun set, I made a fire and roasted some marshmallows. I felt peaceful and happy. When I started to feel tired, I crawled into my tent and zipped it up, turned off my flashlight, and lay down on my sleeping bag. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep. But I was awakened by a loud noise in the middle of the night. They sounded like heavy footsteps, and then all of a sudden a huge black figure to her through the fabric of my tent. I tried to get up and run, but all of a sudden I felt a sharp pain in my neck, as if it had been sliced open. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I felt warm blood gushing out of my wound. I couldn't breathe or move, but all of a sudden, I woke up with a start. I gasped for air and touched my neck. There was no blood, no cut, no pain. It was just a dream, a horrible nightmare. It was still dark outside. I could see the stars shining through the mesh window of my tent. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on. I checked the time on my watch. It was around 3 a.m. I tried to calm myself down and go back to sleep, but it was impossible. The nightmare had shaken me to the core. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of that thing tearing through my tent and cutting my neck open. I didn't want to stay in this place any longer than necessary. I waited until dawn, then quickly gathered my things and stuffed them into my truck. I didn't bother to fold my tent or clean up the campsite. I just wanted to get out of there. As I drove away from the lake, I saw something that made me shiver with horror. On the side of the trail, there was a dead fox lying on the ground. It had been killed in the same way as me and my dream. His throat had been slit open by something sharp. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead and a knot in my stomach. How could this be? How can my nightmare come true? Was it a coincidence? I didn't stop to find out and kept driving. I don't know what happened that night, or what killed that fox, or why I matched my dreams so perfectly. But one thing is certain. I will never go camping again. I was hiking back to my campsite by the lake. I had left my tent and supplies there earlier that day, and had gone for a hike to enjoy the beauty of nature. But when I approached the lake, I noticed something. There was a lady standing by the shore, her back turned to me. She was wearing a long dark dress. She seemed to be staring at the lake unmoving. I slowed down, feeling a bit uneasy. Who was she? What was she doing here? There was no sign of any other campers or hikers in the area. Maybe she was lost when I needed help. I decided to call out to her, hoping to get her attention. "Hello," I said loudly. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. She didn't even flinch. I tried again, louder this time. "Hello, can you hear me?" Still nothing. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was wrong with this lady. Maybe she was deaf or mentally ill. I decided to keep my distance and walk around her, avoiding eye contact. I just wanted to get to my campsite and forget about her. I walked past, but when I was about 10 m away from her, I heard a scream from behind me. It was loud and piercing, like someone in pain or terror. I turned around startled, but to my horror, there was no one behind me. No one in, just the trees in the trail. I felt a surge of panic. Where did the lady go? How did she disappear so fast? I scanned the area in 180, looking for any sign of her. That's when I saw her. She was now standing on the other side of the lake, facing me. She looked different. Brahms looked like they had been ripped off and reattached, dangling from her dislocated shoulders. Her eyes were wide and wild, staring at me with malice. She was just standing there, staring at me, not moving at all. I felt a jolt of fear. What did she want from me? I didn't wait to find out, so I did the only thing I could.
Iran.
I ran as fast as I could away from the lake, and from the lady. I didn't look back. I didn't care about my tent or my supplies. I just wanted to get out of there. I ran until I reached the main road. Well, I flagged down a passing car. The driver was a friendly guy who offered me a ride to the nearest town. He asked me what I was doing out there alone. I told him I had been camping by the lake, but I never told anyone about this experience. I still don't know what happened near that lake.